Thanks very much. We'll start today hearing from Duchamp himself, being interviewed by Joan Bakewell in May of 1968, and he's going to talk about chance, which I'm sort of going to touch on throughout this talk today. So I thought it'd be good to hear straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. It's interesting in that he rarely gave interviews, and Joan Bakewell had done her research, so she was very eloquent, and I'd recommend, if you get a chance after this presentation, to have a look, because it's half an hour and a really good insight into his thinking. So here he is, talking about the large glass to begin with, but also specifically about chance. So thanks for coming along today. I have, just with the beginning of this, I thought I'd start with a question. So how many people play chess? Or raise your hands if you play chess. Or have played chess? Familiar with chess? Okay, I think we've got a majority. So this presentation will cover why chess is important in art and life, Marcel Duchamp's thinking on how chess relates to art, computing, including infinite loops, infinite delays, artificial intelligence, social media, the large glass, Plato's cave, and Marcel Duchamp's thinking about the machine. We'll also look at the influence of Jarre, Pirot, Raymond Roussel, and Max Headroom, or Max Stirner, on Duchamp himself, and his collaboration with Dada, André Breton, the Surrealists, and his friendships, including Monique Fong and the Matisse family connection. So the benefits of chess. Fashion model and former president of the Estonian Chess Federation, Carmen Kass, who you can see here, describes how playing chess has guided her life decisions. In life, we make decisions and we have choices. Chess trains you to see through the head. You can make better choices, you can analyse good and bad, and you can see further. Life is a chain of command. Basically, one thing leads to another. And you can make the wrong move, and when you make the wrong move, there are consequences. So chess can be compared to life. The pieces on the board are the elements of matter, energy, space, and time. In order to play chess well, a player must develop and utilise the brain's left hemisphere, which deals with object recognition, and right hemisphere, which deals with pattern recognition. So it's a chain of command, a causality. And here we have a 1959 work showing the famous large glass with the addition of two things, the mountains in the background and the telegraph. So it's a joke on the French for bedridden mountains, which sounds like causality when you sound it out. And it's like the communication via the telegraph pole and wires. It's also the photo of myself, which we tried to emulate, and my daughter, Jess, taken in Queenstown with a game of chess underway, posing as Man Ray and Duchamp. Note, I've lost my queen and have made the wrong move, and there will be consequences. And sure enough, eventually, I don't know if you can read the black writing, but it's. I just wanted to share that I've been playing chess for almost every day for 2 months, and I've finally beaten my dad. So in the chess, in chess, it's there are some extreme, and this is a quote from Duchamp from 1966. In chess, there are some extremely beautiful things in the domain of movement, but not in the visual domain. It's in the imagining of the movement or the gesture that makes the beauty. In this case, it's completely in one's grey matter. And then again in August 1952, in an address to the New York Chess Federation, he would say, "Beauty in chess is closer to beauty in poetry. The chess pieces are the block alphabet which shapes thoughts, and these thoughts, although making a visual design on the chessboard, express their beauty abstractly like a poem. Actually, I believe that every chess player experiences a mixture of two aesthetic pleasures. First, the abstract image akin to the poetic idea of writing. Secondly, the sensuous pleasure of the ideographic execution of that image on the chessboard. From my close contact with artists and chess players, I've come to the personal conclusion that while all artists are not chess players, all chess players are artists. And then again in 1960s he would say, and why isn't my chess playing like an art activity? A chess game is very plastic, you construct it. It's mechanical sculpture, and with chess one creates beautiful problems, and that beauty is made with the head and hands. Octavio Paz suggested that futurists wanted to suggest movement by means of a dynamic painting. Duchamp applies the notion of delay, or rather analysis, to the movement, what may happen next. So if you've got a chessboard, you've got the queen, and the queen can go in all directions because it's all powerful. You've got the king, and they can only go in all directions but one move at a time. And the bishops can go on the diagonals, and the rook can go either side or forward, and the knight, which is special in that it's the only piece that can jump over, can actually go two forward, either side, back and to the either side. And then the pawns can go two at the start, one, and dually one again, until perhaps, hopefully, metamorphosising into a queen, bishop, knight or rook, although most people choose the queen at the end of the board. So it's that anticipation of what goes through the mind and the mass combination of mass, time, space and energy that was important, and the possible outcomes of that to Duchamp. That's seen in an exhibition in 1945 when he had the chess grandmaster George Koltanowski, hope they got that pronunciation right. He gave a blindfolded demonstration with 7 simultaneous games as seen in the picture. And you can see Max Ernst on the far right and his wife Dorothea Tanning next to him. And so what would happen is that during this blindfold demonstration, Duchamp would act as referee, and you can see him up the back there with his back turned to the camera. Duchamp was not physically engaged with any of the matches, but announced the move played by the player on the table using the alphanumeric chess notation. Koltanowski would then respond in the same language with a move, leaving the player to process and strategise on the next move, and then they'd move to the next table. So they basically went around, and so this guy had 7 chess games in his head, and apparently he played a match where he had 37. He took on 37 chess games, all from blindfold memory, which is just incredible. And I suppose this related strongly to Duchamp's conception that the chessboard and pieces are a necessary but imperfect interface between the mind and the game. His idea was that the physical elements of chess should interfere as little as possible with the mental elements. So that's very important with understanding his approach to art as well. And of course, whenever his friends or groups were gathered together, as Monique Fong observed, his friend, everybody played chess at the drop of a hat. It was just commonplace to be with or involved in chess in some way or other. And to such an extent that Joan Bakewell recalled this year in an interview that what he really wanted to talk about was chess. He invited her to play a game and was very disappointed when she said she was a very poor player. So it's basically something that he was very, very passionate about. And so that sort of passion, I think, influenced his work. We've got some photos here. I don't know if you can see them, but they're from 1917 in New York. So they're his studio on 33 West 67th Street, New York City. And the photos are taken by Henry Pierre Roche and Beatrice Wood. The you can just make out those big sheets of the large glass stacked together against the wall, with a chessboard leaning up against them. And what I'll quote from you now is from Roche's novel called Victor, which was written about Marcel Duchamp. Victor asked them to stay for 24 hours in his enormous studio room to take receipt of a delivery. Coat hooks were nailed to the floor, and that's you can see the coat hook, or what was called trap, which is also a chess move which tempts an opponent to make a losing move. Roche continues, a bicycle wheel and its fork and a large snow shovel served as artworks. There were gigantic sheets of glass supported on trestles. This was the bride stripped bare by her bachelors. Some parts were clear, others coated in layers of dust of varying thickness. A label said, dust breeding, be careful. On the walls were large vertical chessboards on which he was playing correspondence games with masters in far-off places. So you can see the large influence of chess in this scene. With my background in computing, Marcel Duchamp's work has always been of interest. Such things as the from 1915, which you see on the left-hand side, is a good example of a computer program with a variable-like creation invented before computers existed. Also, chess is a lot like computing with a structure and rules that clearly define process for the game. Chess is an area where people and computers can compete, and there are many learnings from this interaction. As my mathematician cousin James Picton-Warlow explains, chess is a sufficiently complex computation that we have no hope of a mechanical solution. We discover fruitful paths and useful heuristics, which is true of mathematics as well. You cannot formulate the new notion of truth algorithmically. Therein lies the beauty. The number of variations of chess is virtually incalculable, estimated to be 10 to the 120th power of variations, which is 1 followed by 120 zeros. It's beyond comprehension. As Monique Fong says in a Duchamp text, which is available in this book, with the same pieces, the game endlessly renews itself. And I think that points to why Marcel Duchamp would say there is no solution as there is no problem. In chess, there are 9 million different possible positions after 3 moves each. There are over 288 billion different possible positions after 4 moves each. The number of distinct 40-move games is far greater than the number of electrons in the known universe. In fact, the number of possible moves is so vast that no one's ever been able to calculate it exactly, which is why we have the Shannon number, which is the 1 to the power of 120. In late 1967, Jasper Johns, in his role as artistic director of the Merce Cunningham dance, told Marcel Duchamp of his desire to create a stage decor for Cunningham's new work based on the famous Bride Stripped Bare. Duchamp's now well-known quip was, certainly, but who's going to do all the work? Marcel Duchamp attended the premiere on March the 19th, 1968. The title Walk Around Time is of interest from a computing perspective, as dancer Carolyn Brown tells us. It's computing jargon, and it refers to walk around time when computer programmers walked about waiting for the computer to compile. Anyone who's done much computing will know the experience of walk around time. The large glass, I imagine the components all work together like a machine: space, time, matter and energy, declarations, interfaces, instantiations and real-time processing. In computing terms, the large glass can be represented as an infinite loop, a machine and process that seemingly has no end, an infinite delay, an X-ray-like capture of something that cannot just be visually represented. As Jean Sequet said, the machine only runs on words. The words are in the notes. And so what we have with the notes is a number of editions or versions, all relating to the large glass. The first one was in 1914, which actually predates the large glass, but it contains a number of key elements that then appeared in the large glass work itself, which you see at the bottom there. Then in 1934, the most important of the notes is the green box, which was actually translated by Richard Hamilton in 1960 into English from the French. And that's the one that he then used to build a replica of the large glass. And he claims that he used just the notes to build a complete replica of the large glass and nothing else. I think he said he asked one additional question of Duchamp about it for clarification, but the rest of it he claims is all in the notes. So, and then the later one, or the last one, is the white box in 1967, which contains further material, but really the green box is the one that relates closest to the large glass itself. So, as Monique Fong says, with the same pieces, the game endlessly renews itself. The notes are unordered, loose and unnumbered in all of the boxes that Duchamp produced. As Calvin Tompkins said, again and again in Duchamp's notes there is a joyous sense of a mind that has broken free of all restraints, a mind at play in a game of its own devising whose resolution is infinitely delayed. The notes establish the rules of the game for the large glass, and just like chess, having read them, the viewer can imagine the endless ideographic possibilities when viewing the work, which is a lot like the chess analogy. Both the large glass and Duchamp's final work, Été donné, rework Plato's cave allegory. The allegory of the cave is a theory put forward by Plato concerning human perception. Plato claimed that knowledge gained through the senses is no more than opinion, and that in order to have real knowledge, we must gain it through philosophical reasoning. The theory of forms or theory of ideas is a viewpoint attributed to Plato which holds that non-physical but substantial forms or ideas represent the most accurate reality. In the allegory, Plato likens people untutored in the theory of forms to prisoners chained in a cave, and you can see a picture of that up on the right-hand side. All they can see is the wall of the cave. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, there is a parapet along which puppeteers can walk. The puppeteers who are behind the prisoners hold up puppets that cast shadows on the wall of the cave. The prisoners are unable to see these puppets, the real objects that pass behind them. What the prisoners see and hear are shadows and echoes cast by objects that they do not see. In Plato's cave, Socrates explains how the philosopher or artist is like a prisoner who is freed or escapes from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are not reality at all, for he can perceive a true form of reality rather than the manufactured reality that is the shadows seen by the prisoners. In the story, the artist goes back to the cave to tell those still enslaved that there is another reality and that the reality they have is compromised and poorer. Similarly, the large glass shows the fourth dimension as a projection, a delay in glass, which looks to exit the cave of 3 and 2-dimensional representation. As Duchamp explains, the bride is a sort of invention, a bride of my own, a new human being, half robot, half fourth-dimensional. Anything that has a 3-dimensional form is the projection in our world of a fourth-dimensional world, and my bride, for example, would be a 3-dimensional projection of a fourth-dimensional bride. And of course we have, I think in this day and age, very much similar Plato cave-like experiences with our dear friend in the top centre there. We're going to win so much, we're going to be tired of winning. So like the Truman Show, in our own world is now dominated by social media, reality TV, artificial intelligence, artificial reality and fake news. It's mixed in with an at times quite frightening and predictable mirror playback of your interests and beliefs. A modern Plato cave. There's also a great temptation on social media to act as a puppeteer yourself and to carefully curate an image for the world to see. So you can apply Plato's allegory of the cave to the present day, the way we perceive things around us and the way we lead and present our lives, and the information we are provided is actually not necessarily the truth. There's a good episode in Black Mirror called Nosedive, in which Lacey, who you can see at the top right-hand corner there, is basically living her life rating and being rated. Ordering a cup of coffee, she gets a rating on that and rates the person who gave her the cup of coffee, and it's just endless daily interaction of rating and being rated. So your reality is your rating. In Westworld, you have Maeve Millay, the robot character, who is like the escaped philosopher when she realises she's been exploited and decides to go back to warn the other robots. So the large glass proposes an escape plan by suggesting that you actively question what is around you and in doing so put it in its place. Check your reality and actively criticise it. Marcel Duchamp saw the machine as having a dehumanising element and used it to manufacture his own obscurity via the ready-made manufactured object. His work displays an underlying mistrust of the machine and suggests that it's definitely not the master to put humanity's trust in. In the 1965 paper, Speculations Concerning the First Ultra-Intelligent Machine, Irving Good described artificial intelligence as a technological singularity. Let an ultra-intelligent machine be defined as a machine that can far surpass all intellectual activities of anyone, however clever. Since the design of machines is one of these intellectual activities, an ultra-intelligent machine could design even better machines. There would then be unquestionably an intelligence explosion, and the intelligence of humans would be left far behind. Thus, the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that humans need ever make, and then provided that the machine is docile enough to tell us how to keep it under control. And so you have people such as Jonathan Nolan, who's the co-writer of the Westworld series, having extreme reservations at times with companies like Facebook and Google, who really he sees as barreling towards AI without any accountability. So look around you and question the status quo. And you can see here there's some lovely comment by Diane Jones, who's a Noongar from Northam, with her work. Look here on the far left, and there's Clive Palmer making the Mona Lisa great again in the centre, bottom. And in 2016, what Irving Good predicted started to appear. There was a 5-Go game match, and I'm not sure has anyone heard of Go or aware of Go? I certainly wasn't that familiar with it, but it's very, very popular in China, Korea and Japan, and it's actually more complicated than chess. So it was seen as a bit of a bastion for man versus machine as far as the matchup. And so in 2016, Lee Sedol, who was the 18-time champion, world champion, he came up against Alphago, which was a Go program developed by Google DeepMind. And they played in Seoul between the 9th and the 15th of March. So Alphago uses deep learning and neural networks to essentially teach itself to play Go. Alphago initially learned from thousands of games played by professional human players. It decides on the next move based on probability to win associated with each of the possible moves using Monte Carlo simulations. Alphago improves by playing against itself using reinforcement learning. However, the game of Go is so complex and the array of possible moves is so wide that AlphaGo cannot consider all the different possible game situations. When AlphaGo started to play against Lee Sedol, there were game situations that it had not experienced, and so it could make suboptimal decisions. Thus the importance of, I've got it over there, in game 4, White 78, which is the move that Lee made against AlphaGo, and it completely threw the computer because it was a daring move, out of the blue, pure inspiration, and he won that game. But whenever Lee played a conservative game, he lost. So it's worth mentioning that the AlphaGo encounter improved Lee Sedol's subsequent games. So he became very, intrigued and learnt a lot. And certainly when you see the film, you can see that the AlphaGo creators have no idea what is going to be the computer will nominate to move. It's completely, and often what seemed to them to be not the brightest of moves turned out to be quite astute given what it's instructed to do. So as you see the film AlphaGo, you can see Lee Sedol having to adjust to the elimination of the opposing player, the lack of retinal or visual contact. There are no hints or responses that he's used to. So he's just looking and there's nothing there. He's usually familiar with looking someone in the eyes and trying to suss out their next move, or if they're nervous, or that those indicators are not there. And so the situation with this move away from the rational to the intellectual reminds me of Duchamp with his focus on ideographic execution and to highlight the beauty of the intellectual process of chess. The discovery of a way to play chess without seeing the other player, the elimination of the rational by correspondence games, and the blindfolded chess event, of course, in 1945. And in both instances, Duchamp's objective was to heighten the sense of invisibility between players, in one way to remove the physical presence, and in the other to remove the sight. And as Duchamp said, the artist of tomorrow will go underground. In the 1960s, Monique Fong remembers telling Marcel Duchamp about a conference on computers. She told him that the first question Americans and Soviets asked each other was, How does yours play chess?" To which Duchamp remarked, "They are slow." Those were the days. In 1985, Garry Kasparov became world chess champion. In the same year, he describes, "I played what is called simultaneous exhibitions against 32 of the world's best chess playing machines in Hamburg. I won all the games, and then it was not considered much of a surprise I could beat 32 computers at the same time. But by 1997, Garry was defeated by a single machine called Deep Blue. In 1997, the 1997 match was the first defeat of a reigning world chess champion by a computer under tournament conditions. Initially, he was not very happy. However, if you can't beat him, join him. And Garry now says, don't fear intelligent machines, go with them. The machine has finally come for the white-collared, the college graduates, the decision-makers, and it's about time in his view. But how best to manage this? Is there an acceptable synthesis? As always, there needs to be governance, checks and balances, and accountability in order to provide a controllable outcome. Exponential speed of development will be a real issue. Stephen Hawking, in his final book, Brief Answers to the Big Questions, suggests a culture of risk assessment and awareness of societal implications of artificial intelligence. So, as Kasparov faced 21 years ago with chess and Lee Sedol 2 years ago with Go, we're all facing the same situation today in what we do. Even if you are the best, you'll need to adapt, and I would suggest with a degree of healthy Duchampian scepticism. Duchamp submitted the new Descending the Staircase with the Cubists at the 28th exhibition of the Society of Independence in early 1912. However, Duchamp's brothers, Jacques Villon and Raymond Duchamp Villon, were sent by the hanging committee to ask him to voluntarily withdraw the painting or paint over the title and rename it something else. To this, Duchamp recalled, "I said nothing to my brothers, but I then went immediately to the show, took my painting home in a taxi. It was really a turning point in my life, I can assure you. I saw that I would not be very much interested in groups after that." Soon after, Marcel Duchamp would travel to Munich and begin work on the Bride Stripped Bare with a determination to break free from the constraints imposed upon him in Paris. Later that year, he would train as a librarian and read a number of authors and books that would have a significant influence on his thinking. All of this fueled, I think, by his need for independence after what he saw as a betrayal. He was determined to forge his own path from this point onwards. So there's Max Stirner, or Max Headroom, who fiercely promoted the sanctity of the individual, which is something that Duchamp identified with strongly in 1912 and beyond. And Duchamp is first likely to have read Stirner in Munich in 1912, soon after the rejection by the independents. Stirner's philosophy was all about questioning, proposing, joking, suggesting, using tongue-in-cheek and irony. Duchamp's work, Three Standard Stoppages from 1913, is directly influenced by Stirner's thinking, a unique system of measurement that is determined by the individual, which was to be utilised exclusively within the framework of his or her own personal requirements. No one else's, just the individual's. The Three Standard Stoppages reflects the philosopher Hegel's dialectical method of three divisions: the thesis, or the thing, the antithesis, its opposite, and the synthesis, the process of their unification. Marcel Duchamp actually wrote a book on the chess endgame called Opposition and Sister Squares Are Reconciled in 1932. The use of the dialectical method can be seen in a 1925 chess poster which you can see on the far left-hand side there, that Duchamp produced with black and white cube sides and a third synthesis ready brown colour side. His work, Door 11 Rue Larry, which is on the far left, can be both open and closed at the same time. The door is a synthesis of open and closed. And create your own meaning. So Duchamp was very influenced by the ancient Greek skeptic Pyrrho, who rejected absolutes and said that things are indistinguishable and not measurable. Pyrrho believed that objective knowledge is impossible to achieve and that one should free oneself from opinions. Duchamp read him about around 1912. Duchamp was also influenced by the French iconoclast Alfred Jarret, the inventor of pataphysics, which is the science of the laws that govern exceptions. Jarret claimed the laws of science were not really laws at all, but merely exceptions that occurred more frequently. Pataphysics rejected all scientific explanations of any kind and argued that everything could just as well be its opposite. One of Jarre's best axioms is God is a tangential point between zero and infinity. Duchamp also mentions Raymond Roussel, whose Impressions of Africa was seen by him in 1912. Like the large glass, Roussel aimed at creating a world from scratch in which imagination is everything. And one of my favourites that is actually in the show here is the Monte Carlo bond from 1938, the lithograph. So I worked in investment banking for about 8 years, and one of my favourite Duchamps is this lithograph. Duchamp said he had figured out a system to break the Monte Carlo casino. The bond was issued by Duchamp to raise money, to make money, and to be precise, provide a 20% return without fail to investors. He figured out, he claimed that he had a system. There is a lot to like about this work. Duchamp is photographed on the right-hand side here as by Man Ray as Mercury, god of commerce, who is also god of vagabonds and thieves, which summed up a lot of investment banking during the late 90s and the turn of last century and beyond. It has a charter like a formal financial document. As I discovered in investment banking, anything could be packaged into a bond, junk bonds, and so on. So Marcel Duchamp, I think, was on the money here. And as Duchamp was questioning, attacking, challenging, proposing, joking, tongue-in-cheek, it didn't stop with his own art. It went on with many collaborations. It was important to get his message out in the capacity as curator, an artist, and in particular, if it could relate to chess. He generally had complete power in the execution of the exhibitions he was involved in, but he would never suggest that he was part of any group as such, which is interesting and I suppose relates back to his experience in 1912. Monique Fong told me that in 1949, Jean Sequet, who belonged to the Paris Surrealist group with Monique, was asked by André Breton to investigate the large glass and Marcel Duchamp, who were seen as both essential but distant comets for the Surrealists. Duchamp acted as collaborator and curator for a number of significant Surrealist shows from the late 1930s through to the early 1960s. The first papers of Surrealism from 1942, which is on display here as part of the exhibition, has a Swiss cheese on the front and 5 bullet holes in a barn door on the back, which I think may be a star constellation, but I've never been able to prove it. This was the show with a mile of string, which you can see on the bottom left-hand corner there, which made the paintings hard to see and obscured. And Carol Janis, who can be seen here, that's a photo of him in front of the large glass last year, was given a very important role at the opening of the show. A group of children led by the then 11-year-old Carol, consisted of 6 boys dressed in baseball, basketball and football attire who threw balls amongst themselves, and 6 girls who played skipping games, jacks and hopscotch. They were under strict orders from Duchamp to carry on playing throughout the event and to explain, if questioned, that they were playing on Mr. Duchamp's instructions. Mr. Duchamp told us we could play here. This was the second Surrealist show with Duchamp as curator. The first was in Paris in 1938, when he used coal sacks hanging from the ceiling, which was a major fire risk, but they got it through. And you could only see the works using a torch, and that can be seen in the top left-hand corner there. Both shows are intended to frustrate, disrupt, and make you think. There's a couple of other excellent publications that were made during the 40s, of which 2 are also on show here as part of the Here and Now 18 exhibition. The View magazine from 1945 and VVV from 1943 with the twin touch test. There's also a 1953 Sidney Janis show which featured a catalogue as a screwed up paper stored in a waste paper basket. So at the start you pick up the screwed up paper, that's the catalogue, you open it up and then you screw it up and put it back. So it's very much I suppose a Dada view of and treatment of catalogues. And Monique Fong recalls, I remember help crumpling up the newspaper page that was used as a program for the Dada show. They were put in a large waste paper basket before the opening. It's also, with Duchamp, very important to understand his connection with the Matisse family. So he married Pierre Matisse's wife, ex-wife, Alexina Tini Duchamp, or she became Tini Duchamp in 1954. So from that point on, it really, I think, was very important in his life. You have Paul Matisse, who was very closely involved in his work and actually published a complete set of notes of his notes in 1980, and Jacqueline Matisse Monnier, who actually helped build a lot of the Duchamp's works with him in the 1950s and 60s. So they really are guardians of his legacy, even now today. Jacqueline's son, Anton, runs the association Marcel Duchamp, and they actually will clarify and verify works actively as authenticators. Sophie Matisse, the daughter of Paul Matisse, is an artist in her own right, and you can perhaps see the Matisse-Duchamp collaboration or connection together with the chess pieces that she produced as an artist. And that's some of her work as well, back in 5 minutes, which I find quite funny. The vacant Mona Lisa off for a cup of tea, and Vermeer, Hopper, all empty. Friendship. So over the last few years I had the privilege to get to know Monique Fong, and actually arranged for her to translate one of her pieces into English from French last year, and it's in this publication. So it's been really good to sort of, I suppose, speak to someone firsthand who was a friend, and just ask some questions. What was this like, or what was that? So it's been quite an honour, really, and a treat to be able to get the sort of insights. And so she says here, my books deal with the person, and my good fortune to have known him when not so many people did. He did say, though not to me, he was 50 years ahead of his time. Also that he was a person of great simplicity. I believe he knew exactly how important he was. So did Picasso, who upon learning of his death said he was wrong. So there's that great sort of personal insight that comes through there, which I found really interesting. And so talking to her and asking her questions has been really a lot of fun. And also, I suppose, things that you can read, and there's a lot written about Duchamp, and extremely esoteric stuff at that. But it's good to have someone who's, I found it more interesting to read about someone who's more of a friend than anything else, not necessarily understanding the large glass, but having a pretty good idea. And I think the article that she wrote is actually quite insightful. But she certainly doesn't claim to be an expert, which I find refreshing. And insights such as, he thought the large glass, the great glass, is the magnum opus as far as he is concerned, but the ready-made are what changed art for the better or for the worse in the end. So that's been very interesting. So in conclusion, we've covered the importance of chess in understanding what Marcel Duchamp was on about when he said art should be at the service of the mind. The questioning used in the large glass, notes and ready-made, like 3 standard stoppages, can be used as a philosophy to tackle the complexities of social media and artificial intelligence with its coming volatility that holds both opportunity and danger. Marcel Duchamp did not work in isolation. He had collaborative friendships and family throughout his life. To this day, they remain very loyal and supportive to his legacy. Now more than ever, before it's going to be the idea, the interaction, the idea graphic, the dream, the imagination that will be the most important thing to question, disrupt and provoke. This presentation has attempted to answer the question, how is Marcel Duchamp relevant now and in the future? I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.